Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we have more spoilers from Jump to Lightspeed, and this is part 4. So as usual, we are rating cards that we haven't played with, so this is first impression. 4 ratings, not excited, not sure, good, and amazing. First card today is going to be Admiral Holdo, which is our resistant theme leaders. This is an archetype that FFG seems to be wanting to push forward. This leader is, in my opinion, pretty horrible. The ability is not very good because it's very slow. You're giving first the buff to the units, and then the unit can attack. So that's kind of abilities, that buffs that don't allow you to attack on the same action as you are applying the buffs are, generally speaking, quite weak because they're very easy to interact with the opponent. There are a few exceptions to that when they're very, very pushed, but generally speaking, that's sort of like is the trend. And the fact that it's limited to resistance units or resistance units with an upgrade, or any unit with a resistant upgrade on it, is a huge limitation, as it's going to limit the card pool of the card you can. In my opinion, for a card that has a trait restricted ability to work, the ability needs to be very powerful. All the trait that is attached to it needs to be widely available, which is currently not the case with resistance. But here the payoff is not even good, and it also costs a resource, which is fairly annoying as well. So the ability is not good, and even in the future, as we're going to see more resistance card, even if you reach this critical mass of resistance card, I don't think this ability is going to be worth it. As for the leader deploy, unfortunately, it's not better. We got pretty awkward stats, a 3-8 stat. That's a lot of stats, like 11 stats in total, which is actually not that much for a 6-drop. And most 6-drop in a game that has 11 stats don't really see much play, because I think it's not really that great. And the fact that the distribution of stats is not good at all, and the ability is just free, basically. That's just what it does, and the deploy on 6 is always a big bummer. So this leader is, unfortunately, I'm quite confidently going to say it's not going to see any competitive play. Moving on, we have a very interesting card. It's not only interesting on the scale of Star Wars Limited, it's also an interesting card on the scale of trading card games, because I've been playing trading card games for more than 20 years, and I don't remember a single Magic the Gathering card which that has the power of reducing the deck size. It is usually territory that even Wizard of the Coast has never been in, as far as I'm aware. And I think there's a good reason for this, is because basically restricting the size of the deck can be a little bit boring, because once the deck is very small, it kind of makes it so the games are very, very similar from one another. First of all, it's a difficult mechanic to balance, and then it's also a mechanic that can make games a little bit boring, as you're basically seeing the same card over and over again. Like, too much consistency is not good for a card game, and that's the reason why we have a deck limit at the first place. So in this case, it reduced the deck size by 5 cards. So it basically makes it so it's 10% easier to see any single card in your deck at the cost of 10% HP, because you're losing 3 HP to make that happening compared to a 30 HP base. So I would say that something important about deck size. So obviously here, for me, this is brand new territory. So I'm going to try to speculate on thinking what kind of deck is going to be wanting that kind of effect. So something to understand is that consistency is specifically important for decks that tends to want short games. So if you're playing like an aggro deck, consistency is very important, because games are going to be very short. So which means that you're not going to see a lot of cards. You're going to see your opening hands, and then you're going to see maybe 5 and 6 turns after that. So that's 12 cards if you're drawing 2 cards per turn. That means that you need to have, if you want to see a single card very consistently, that's going to require you to have a certain your deck needs to be consistent. And this is the reason why, for example, aggro decks play a lot of 2-drops, because they really want to see consistently that turn 1 play more than any other deck in the game. And games are shorter, meaning that any inconsistency, so any times you don't find when you need, it is that much more penalizing for your deck, because games are so short. So that's like the first category of decks, which I think are going to be interested in reducing their deck size, because that's going to increase their consistency. That's going to increase the chances for them to see certain type of cards. As opposed to that, control decks don't need as much consistency, because they play very long games, which means that throughout they obviously need a certain consistency because they need to see certain cards at a certain moment of the game, but most of the cards they don't need, they tend to make games really long, which means that they are likely to see a larger portion of the deck throughout the game as the game operates. Not only that, they also have a small chance to actually be milling, like the actually deck size actually mattering in the game, which is not that often, but can matter as well. So as opposed, I think control decks are definitely going to be wanting that kind of effect less, while aggro decks are going to be wanting to decrease their deck size significantly. Another categories of deck that don't currently exist in Star Wars Limited, but will be definitely interested in an effect like this are combo decks. So decks that are trying to combine certain set of cards together as a win condition. And those decks obviously want to see the decks being smaller because they want to have higher chances of being able to draw their combo. They want card quality. They want a consistency over their combos because their combos are extremely powerful when they combine together. So for all those factors, I think it's going to be very interesting cards. Difficult to see. I think I'll personally be very surprised if this card doesn't see competitive play. I don't know if it's going to see competitive play right away, but I think it is definitely going to be potentially see a lot of play. So 3 HP penalty is significant, but it is not the end of the world. And if you have a deck that really values this consistency very much, I think it's going to be a cost worth paying. So for me, I'm going to give this a thumbs up. I'm not 100% sure it's going to see play, but I think the odds are fairly high. I think the odds are high enough that I'm willing to give a thumbs up. Next, there is a Desperate Commando. So Desperate Commando is a card that looks pretty bad on paper, but actually is, I think, surprisingly good. One of the things is that this card basically trades into any 3/3s in the game. So it's kind of like a 3/2 for 2 in some way, because it's going to be able to trade with all of the 3 drops in the game. Not only that, it can also kind of attack into something, die, and then give a -1/-1 to something that has a 1 health, which can be also quite powerful. So I like this card. It is, once again, it is sort of a 3/2 for 2, and it is something that is needed in blue. If you're going to be playing a mono blue deck, you don't have many options for 3 attack units in the early stage of the game, and this actually matters if you want to play against aggro. You're going to be very happy to have access to those units that can trade with a Marines, or trade with a Sabine, or trade with those 3 health units in the issue of the game. So for that reason, I like this card quite a bit. It's not obviously going to be an auto-include or anything like this, but this is a card I think might be see play in mono blue. Another deck that might want to try this card might be a Thrawn deck, which obviously can double trigger the -1 for -2/-2. So for me, I'm going to give this a maybe. I don't think it's going to be widely played, but I think there might be a few decks that might be interested in an effect like that. Next, we got the BB-8, which is one of the card that synergizes with the Resistance trait. So it is currently just a 1/4 for 1, but then, so not bad stats, just as face value. The other R2 though is Mono Aeroism is also 1/4 for 1, so not definitely something, so in this case they are basically the same. But the piloting here costs 1 instead of costing 0, gives a +1/+2, and you can pay an extra 2, and if you do, you get to ready the resistant unit. So it's kind of think about this as a ready effect for resistance card, and I thought this ready effect is, if you're playing this in a resistant deck, it is effectively the best ready effect you could possibly hope for, because it's very flexible, can be played as a 1/4, can be played as an upgrade, or can be played as a ready effect. So flexibility is very nice, and the fact that it ready things of any size and also gives a +1/+2 bonus is very good. Obviously, it's limited to vehicles, but I think this card will definitely see play if there ever is a resistant deck that comes about. I think BB-8. It's safe to say that BB-8 will be part of this deck. I think it's very likely. So I give this a maybe, obviously, because right now we have very low visibility on this resistance archetypes. We have no idea if this archetype is ever going to be a thing in the game. And it's not clear whether or not this archetype is going to make it after jump to light speed. Maybe it's going to take a few more sets for a resistance archetype to emerge. Next, we got Snaps Wexley, and I like this card quite a bit. It's one of the few cards in the sets that is both good as a unit and as a pilot. So as a unit, you get a 2/5 for 3 that's when played, and on attack reduce the cost of your next resistance card, which I think is quite of an impactful ability, especially if you have very cheap resistance card, then you can place the 3 drops and play a 1 drop for free. Or if this thing stays alive, which is likely to be because it has 5 health, not so easy to kill, then you can start kind of ramping into resistance cards. You can basically play Snap Wexley, attack, and then on the next turn attack and play a Poe, for example, which is quite nice. Poe is resistance if you didn't know. So that's quite nice. And then on the other side, we have the piloting effect, which is also quite good, a +2/+2. Then get the top 5 cards first, search for a resistance card and draw it. That effect is quite powerful in the resistance deck. Not only that, it's also kind of a good combination with piloting, which is usually something where you're afraid of doing cards advantage. You're playing a unit, you're playing a pilot on it. If that unit gets killed, you've done basically cards advantage. So having a way to kind of recuperate that card advantage is quite nice. So I think this card is very good. Obviously, it's really meant to be played in a resistance deck. So the playability of this card is going to depend highly on the viability of the resistance archetype. So for this, I'm giving this a maybe. Then we got the Rider's Ship. So the Rider's Ship is a big boy sentinel. Big boy sentinels have not been so playable in Star Wars Unlimited so far, and one of the big reasons is because they're usually a bit too situational. Because first of all, we haven't really had a great one. I mean, we have a Redemption, but Redemption is kind of mostly for the healing. While here, this is most the Sentinel, really the big Sentinel status is really the main event on this card. So 8/6/7 is a very decent stat line. This allows him to trade with most of the powerful capital ship in the game, notably the Avenger, so that's quite nice. What I like about it is so the resistance, you need to control another Sentinel card, a resistance card, but it works for any card, including leader. So if you're playing a resistance leader, this will always have Sentinel, which is very nice. So I don't think you want to play this in a deck that cannot give it always Sentinel. I think that if you're playing this in a regular deck, it's going to be a little bit difficult, but you don't need to play a resistance deck to make this work. I think that just having your leader resistance is enough and to make this 100%, and you get the 8/6 Sentinel that trades with anything in the game, that doesn't die to fire spray, so that's very nice. And the cost is not prohibitive. The cost is definitely decent. And then, of course, it has the when defeated effect that allows you to kill another unit. So I think this card is quite good. I like it. It's really going to depend on if a resistance leader is going to emerge and if that resistance leader is indeed going to be powerful enough that it's going to need that kind of effect. But if it does, then this card is going to be good. So maybe it is a generous thumbs up. There's a lot of unknown that I don't think this card is guaranteed to see play, but I think the likelihood is high enough that I'm willing to give it a thumbs up. So next we got the Tactical Heavy Bombers. So it is a 5-drop with no immediate impact on the game, so that's a problem on by itself. The indirect damage archetype seems to be more of a villainy thing, and I believe that indirect by itself is not going to be very viable. Maybe the exception would be the Y-Wing Squadron thing, that this unit might be pushed enough that the indirect damage won't be good enough on this one. But generally speaking, the indirect damage I think is meant to be a mechanic that is meant to be used in combination with all the card that deals indirect damage, and a critical mass of indirect damage is what makes the deck powerful. I'm just a little bit afraid that that this does not exist in heroism, which makes the indirect damage automatically kind of worse in heroism compared to villainy. So yeah, no immediate impact on the game, very weak stats, indirect damage that is not so strong by itself. The fact that it makes you draw a card if you damage the base is neat, but it's, once again, I don't think this card is good enough. Moving on, we got Black Squadron Scout Wing. Decent stats for the cost, but nothing particularly exciting about this card. We've already seen the stat lines on many units in space before, and those units have never seen play unless they were doing something very special when it came to play, which unfortunately the Black Squadron doesn't. It just allows you to get immediate value out of your pilot. So you put a pilot, you get to attack right away with a +1 attack bonus. That's a nice little effect, but it's nothing truly special that would justify you playing a 5 drop that has no immediate impact on the game. So for me, it is not going to be, it's not going to see play. Then we got the Profundity. So the Profundity is kind of a cool late game card. I think it's very strong against control, as you get to come into play, put a huge threat on the board, discard your opponent, discard a card from their hand, and if they have more cards than you, then you discard again. So obviously, so they basically you can get like an 8/9 with a pillage. I think if you only discard one card, the card is a bit underwhelming. However, if you do discard 2 cards, then the card is a lot more exciting. What are the likelihood that your opponent, that you're going to be able to discard 2 cards from this opponent? This is really going to depend on what you're playing against. The question is this card better than something like a Krayt Dragon as a late game card against control? And the answer is not entirely clear. Maybe there's a world where you want to play both of those things, and depending on the situation, having a bit of flexibility on your late game cards is going to be something that is going to be valuable. And basically playing the Krayt Dragon or the Profundity, depending on the situation, I think they complete each other kind of well, because Krayt Dragon is very good in situation where your opponent has very low cards in hand, with opponent's very low resources, because he is less likely to have an answer, and no answer in Krayt Dragon means death. Profundity is better in a situation of high resources, when the control opponent is high on resources and loads of cards in hand. And then you want to basically kind of bring and get a 3, basically like a 3-for-1 in one card, which I think is very powerful. Not only is this a when played, also a when defeated ability, which is also quite nice. So I think this card is likely to see a little bit of play. Is it going to be more played? Is going to see more play than Krayt Dragon? It's not entirely sure, but I think it is something that you might want to play as like maybe as a one-off sideboard card. It's not going to be something that you're going to see in every single deck. It's going to see something that you're going to see as a 1 or maybe a 2 of in the sideboard to go alongside Krayt Dragon, maybe having more late game options against control. Then we got Decar Cargo Frigate. So Decar Cargo Frigate, loads of stats, but once again a 5-drop with no immediate impact on the game. And this one is quite difficult to deal with because 7 health and space, but you don't have to kill it to deal with it. That's the thing. Just basically playing an open fire on it already makes it like a 2-attack unit in space, which basically render it almost useless. So obviously, it's not entirely unplayable, but I just think that this card is not doing enough as a 5-drop to be a 5-drop with no immediate impact on the game. Because once again, it's very easy to render it pretty much useless just by dealing some damage to it without even having to kill it. So for me, it is going to be not excited. Then we got Mist Hunters. So Mist Hunter is probably like kind of a better version of Punishing One. So Punishing One is currently the card that sees play as a space unit in Cad Bane as a 3-drop in space, a 3/4 for 3. The ability to untap the Punishing One because you've killed a unit with bounty, pretty much irrelevant in Cad Bane because Cad Bane does not play bounty, so you're just basically playing as a 3/4/3 in space Underworld. This card is better because it's a 3/4/3 Underworld, and it does have the bounty hunter. If you play the bounty hunter pilot, discard this phase, you may to draw a card on attack. Obviously, most of the time you want to attack first and then after play a bounty hunter. So it forces you to kind of mess up a little bit with your play patterns sometimes, but I think in this case it's worth it. And also there's some situation where Cad Bane actually wants to play a bounty hunter as its first action because you can play something like a Zuckuss or like a 4 LOM to kill ambush with it, kill something, and then you get to attack with this and draw a card. So I think this is basically, in the context of Cad Bane, this is basically strictly better than Punishing One, and for that basis alone, I'm just going to give it a thumbs up because Cad Bane is still a very strong deck. And yeah, Mist Hunter is just making it slightly better, which is nice. Then we got Turbo Laser Salvo. I've seen a lot of people being excited about this card, and I don't really understand why. This card is so much worse than Overwhelming Barrage on so many levels. So obviously, Overwhelming Barrage costs 5 versus 7. That's the elephant in the room. But let's talk about, let's say you are playing an heroism deck and you are and you want to play this card because you want to have kind of a barrage effect into your green deck. I think you're better off playing seven resource overwhelming barrage over this card. Basically, first of all, overwhelming barrage is not bound to a single arena. It can, if there's a threat on space and a sprint on the ground, it can deal with both of those threats. Turbo Laser Salvo cannot do that. It will have to choose which arena it wants to attack. So overwhelming barrage works on any unit, while this only works on the space unit. That is a huge restriction because it means this thing does not work on your leader. That's a pretty big deal. And yeah, so this card deals the same amount of damage to each unit. You don't have to split the damage, but it doesn't have the +2/+2, which is a big deal. So this means that whenever you're playing Triple Laser Salvo, you can never kill something that is bigger than the unit that you're choosing. So if you have, let's say, a 5 attack unit into play, you will not be able to kill a 7 health unit in front of you. So it doesn't kill. It works better against wider board, I guess, in some situation. But it cannot kill things that are bigger than the unit you're playing it with. So as opposed to Overwhelming Barrage, which will actually deal +2 on that. So that's a big difference. So yeah, this card is just way worse than Overwhelming Barrage on every single level. Almost every level, and even if you're playing that barrage for 7. So if you're playing heroism and you want a barrage effect, just play barrage for 7. Don't play this card. It's really, really bad. Moving on, we got Ahsoka Tano, a new powerful 4 drops for cunning heroism. So obviously very comparable to Kira. This card is very nice. I think it's very, very good. Basically what Kira does is like she'll basically kind of lock one of the best card of your opponent's hand, while this discard the worst card of your opponent's hand, because your opponent will obviously choose the worst card to discard. So generally speaking, I would say blocking the best card of your opponent's hand is better than discarding the worst card of your opponent's hand. But Ahsoka has a few things going for her that makes the analysis a bit more complex than this. First of all, she's a force unit. That means you can play her in the red cunning heroism shell in combination with discard effect like pillage and obviously fourth throw. So fourth throw is very, very strong. While Kira is kind of counter-synergistic with that discard outlet, because you play Kira and then you play a discard effect, the opponent is going to discard a card that's been locked by Kira, which is kind of a bummer. Another thing is like if you're playing against a deck that is very, very heavy on removal, your opponent can very easily, you lock one of the removal, the opponent can just play the other removal to kill Kira. Well, if you play Ahsoka, the card is gone forever, even though it might not be that great of a card. One of the other things that Ahsoka does is like she's actually pretty good against aggro, because aggro doesn't play that many, typically doesn't play that many non-unique card. So what would happen is, especially is that you would play Ahsoka, your opponent might only have unit in their hands, and then they discard that unit, and then you get to exhaust a unit. That's pretty big effect, and that's a huge swing in your favor. So that's very nice. And sometimes it might even force the opponent to discard a non unit card that they didn't want to discard just because they don't want the unit to be exhausted. So overall, it is better or it is worse than Kira. In my opinion, like my first impression is that if you're going to be running a discard deck that has the full synergies in there with the fourth throw and all that stuff, I think Ahsoka is going to be better than Kira. In any other deck, I think Kira is going to be better. So that's kind of my thought process about this. I think they both are good cards, and I think they're both going to see play. So I'm going to give this a thumbs up. So also there's a comparison with K2SO. I think you're probably playing both, is what I'm gathering. If you're playing this specific deck, then obviously with Pillage it starts to be maybe a little bit too many 4-drops. We'll see, but the fact that she has a fourth trait is a pretty big deal, so I think this card is really good. Then we got Frisk. So Frisk is very good. I like the fact that the body on the ground is not completely garbage. The 3-2-4-2 is just decent, And then the +2/+2, you can defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less, which we know there are going to be plenty of because of the piloting mechanic. So whether this card is going to see play depends on 2 major factors. I think the first factor is the pilot is going to be which color is Wedge going to play, because obviously the pilots are mostly going to see play in Wedge. I reckon only the best pilots like Chewbacca are going to see play outside of Wedge. I think just the regular kind of pilots are most likely just going to see play in Wedge. So if Wedge plays red and the piloting is indeed a huge archetype in the meta, this card is going to be amazing. However, then there's a lot of if that comes into this card. So I think it's definitely has its niche, but whether it's going to see play or not is really up to debate. So I'm going to give this a maybe. Then we're going into the second big archetype that is being revealed in this week. It is the First Order archetypes, which FFG is going to try to push for this new set. So in this case, they're giving us an aggro leader, the Captain Phasma. She has an ability that allows you to deal damage to base if you play the Fourth Order card, and it is free. So some people might say, oh, if you play Fourth Order, this is basically just strictly better Sabine ability. The caveat to this is that you have to play the Fourth Order card first. Something that Sabine likes to do is to use her ability as a way to get a soft pass, just to see what your opponent is going to do and to react to it. You can't really do this with this card because you have to commit first to be playing a card and then use the ability. So it is not, even in a First Order focused deck, I don't think it is strictly better than Sabine. Obviously, it doesn't deal damage to your own base, which is kind of a big deal, but in an aggro deck, it's really a big deal only in a mirror match, so that's something to keep in mind. The leader's deploy is not bad. You get a 4/6 for 5, which is pretty decent stats. And then the ability becomes now deal 1 damage to the unit, and then you can damage to base if you play another First Order card this phase. By the way, it is a Fourth Order card. It doesn't have to be a First Order unit. But so right now the problem with this card is that First Order cards are pretty bad, and I'm even including the one that we've seen that we are going to see today. And the problem is for an aggro deck to operate, for this card to really operate and to effectively be a better Sabine, quote unquote, it's going to need the deck to have a 90% First Order cards in it, which is a huge deck building constraint because right now we have pretty much no good First Order cards for an aggro archetype. So maybe just Kylo TIE Silencer, which is okay. It's a sweet twin space, which is nothing crazy. So I think right now, like, what I'm afraid of is that the deck building constraint to make this leader works is immense. It's gigantic, and the payoff is not big. The payoff is just a slightly better version of Sabine's ability. It's better. It really even is debatable in my opinion. So that is kind of the problem with this card. So I don't exclude the possibility of this card to ever become a good card eventually in a few sets down the line when we get a lot of First Order cards. But I'm very, very confident that one set is not going to be enough for a First Order archetypes to emerge. And therefore, Captain Phasma is unfortunately not going to be a good card in competitive, at least at the release of Jump into Lightspeed. Hopefully this will change, or maybe FFG will surprise us and release a huge amount of great First Order aggro cards, in which case this card is going to be obviously pretty nice. Keep in mind, of course, that this card is also competing with another aggro leader, which is Kylo Ren, which is, in my opinion, a pretty strong aggro leader that does see competitive play right now. So this is something that Captain Phasma is going to have to wrestle with. Next, we got the Special Force TIE Fighter. 2342 is simply not very exciting unless it has a really nice ability, and this one unfortunately does not. This ability is very situational. The event that your opponent would have more space unit than you, despite you playing a space unit, that means your opponent has to have at least 2 space units, assuming you have no space units on your side. That's not going to happen very often, and even less in the first turn of the game, in which obviously you are meant to be playing that style of cards, and usually 2 drops want to be played on turn 1. This card on turn 1 is never going to get its ready effect, and later on in the game it's unlikely to have it as well. So this card is going to be a 2-3 for 99% of the game of the time. So this is simply not very good. Then we got General Hux. A lot of text on the card. Basically give Force Order plus raid 1, which is okay. It's not amazing. The 1-4 stat line is pretty underwhelming. And the ability is you get to draw a card if you play First Order card. This is nothing exciting about this card, and it is also kind of like a little bit weird because at the same time you clearly want the First Order wants to be kind of an aggro archetype, and this card is fairly slow. You need to have a bolt for this to matter. You need to play this card first, which is obviously not going to put much pressure, and then eventually you get to do, and then sometimes you get draw a card, like, which is not really something you want to do in aggro. You would just rather attack, even if it's only for one attack or 1 damage. So it's like I don't really know what they're trying to do with this. Maybe in the swarm First Order archetype, that would be something you'll be interested in, which currently we haven't seen really much support for. So it's a bit difficult to know whether this card is going to be good because we haven't much visibility on kind of what they were trying to do with this. But once again, I'm not a big believer in wide archetype unless they get a huge amount of support. And this is not really the support that would make the cut, in my opinion, or this is not the support that would be enough to push these archetypes on the competitive realm. So for me, it's not. Okay, looks like I give it a maybe. This is a generous maybe, I would say. Then we got Captain Phasma. Decent stats, that's the unit this time around. Decent stats. The one playability, once again, limited to First Order is a huge constraint, and once again, the payoff is not massive. The payoff for you need to have a ready unit, a ready First Order unit for this to really matter. She cannot give the +2/+2 to herself, which means that even with ECR you wouldn't be able to do some crazy swing. So this card is in my opinion quite underwhelming. Even in a First Order deck, I think this card is quite underwhelming. So moving, we have First Order TIE Fighter, which is in a sense strictly better than the regular TIE Fighter, which is 2-1 for 1, but this one obviously command villainy, so a bit more specialized in that sense. But if you control the control unit, then it gets raid 1, and 2-1 raid 1 in space is actually very, very strong. With that being said, having to have a token unit that early in the game is fairly difficult to do. I don't think it's unplayable, but I don't think the archetype for this card exists. Okay, so I'm actually, you know what, I give this card a non-excited, but actually I think I'm going to give this a maybe. So ignore this rating. I think I'm going to give this a maybe because I think this might just be a card that you want to, like, if there's going to be a swarm token archetype that's going to appear, this is definitely going to make the cut. So yeah, it's kind of nice. It's not going to replace the old TIE Fighter because the old TIE Fighter is Imperial, therefore it combines with Grand Moff Tarkin to be a 3-2 for 2, which is nice. But if there's a token swarm archetype that emerges, I think this card is going to make the cut because 3-1 raid 1 is quite good. The big question about this card is how often are you going to be able to play this and have it raid 1 on turn 1, which is fairly unlikely. But maybe you can play this on turn 1 alongside other units. On turn 2, play a token generator or whatever, and then attack this on turn 2. Next we got Fight Fire with Fire as the one resource gambit. It is a little bit similar. This card is a little bit similar to McClunky, but it is a bit, obviously McClunky is really focused on these Underworld cards, while this works more generally, but it is a lot weaker than McClunky. It's a lot weaker on multiple levels. First of all, dealing 3 damage to your own unit is a bigger constraint than bouncing another Underworld card, especially when the Underworld card you're going to be bouncing is going to be pretty cheap, which is the way people use McClunky. The other thing is that, of course, it doesn't have the Underworld trade because right now the main way people use McClunky is in combination with Cat Bane, which can deal damage by using an Underworld card. And the fact it's also going to be locked to an arena, while McClunky can work on the ground to space, while this has to be on the same arena. So it is basically worse version of McClunky. In constructed, I think in limited is better than McClunky maybe, because it's more generally useful, more easier to use, can be played in any deck. But in in Constructed, you would rather have a card that is more specialized, but actually is very strong in the deck where it works, rather than a card that is less specialized but worse. Also, it depends on the specification on the how specialized it becomes, but I would say that this is just a worse McClunky. I don't think it's going to see any play in Constructed. Next, we got Moff Gideon. Moff Gideon is a kind of a scary card. You got a 5/4 for 4, which is not a bad stat line, and whenever it actually damages the base, each unit the opponent plays this phase costs 1 more, which is a huge benefit. I mean, it's a huge penalty. The problem with this card is that it's never going to connect, realistically speaking. Against aggro, it's too slow because it's a 4-drop with no immediate impact on the game. And against anything else, it's going to die before it gets to connect. Like, I cannot imagine a situation where you would be able to connect with this card. 4 health is just too weak, and the fact that obviously you can give this card ambush, but then you won't be able to damage the base. So the only thing where I could see this being good if you can give it ambush and overwhelm. And even then, there might be a chance that the ability actually doesn't do anything because your opponent might actually be okay not playing on curve and might actually not even play unit. So there's a tons of deck in the game that will be able to play just something else than a unit. So it's extremely difficult to make work. I mean, if you can connect with this, it can be an absolute blowout. But realistically speaking, you won't. And even if you do, you're not guaranteed to actually cripple your opponent that much. So I don't think this is a good card. And that's it for today. That's it. We didn't have that many spoilers, so we can see the power level this week being definitely weaker than the previous week, which is completely fine. I think the resistance and first order archetypes, I would be surprised if any of those two archetypes are going to be competitive when Jump to Lightspeed releases, because it is clear that unless they really push the archetype a lot with the cards that are left to be revealed, but I'll be surprised. I think it's most likely something that they're going to be pushing throughout the year on set 7 and set 8. Sorry, on set 5 and set 6, rather than something that they are really gonna get right at the gate with this set. I think it's something that they're gonna build up over time in the next few weeks and in the next few sets. I think it's unlikely that this archetype is gonna be good, but I could be wrong. I'm definitely more hopeful for the resistance archetypes than the first order. I think that we've seen. But first of all, there are stronger resistance cards than first order cards in generally speaking in the game. Keep in mind that Poe Dameron is a resistance card. The resistance card we've seen so far are more powerful. Now it really comes down to the leaders. Are we gonna get like strong resistance leaders? That remains to be seen. So it is something that I'm definitely excited about, even though I'm not a big fan of the sequel. I always welcome new archetypes, and I definitely prefer a set like Jump to Lightspeed that push a lot of different archetypes, even if it means some archetypes are not going to be good, rather than a set like Twilight of the Republic that only pushes 2 archetypes and doesn't even manage to make any of those 2 archetypes relevant. So that's, for me, this is much better, at least. And we know already that there's quite a few archetypes that are being pushed in the set that are going to be playable. We already know that the Thrawn when defeated effect is going to be great. We know that this capital ship archetype pushed by Piet is going to be great. Maybe the pilot archetype is going to be really good as well. So this is a lot of things to be excited about. So definitely a weaker week, but I'm still very excited about this set. And I am definitely excited for the future of those resistance versus first order and see how that shapes up in next few sets. Thank you so much for following that video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.